All right. Good morning, family. My name is Kylie. You typically will see me up here with our worship team. Shout out to my people. But today I get to take a moment and open the Bible with you guys and just really see what the Lord would have for us this morning. Our illustrious pastor and, by the way, published author. I'll say it so that he doesn't have to. By the way, his book is available here at our merch store or by visiting ryanltaylor.com. He is currently not with us this morning because he's busy in South Africa training up preachers and leaders there, of which I am one of those people that he has trained. So I do believe very deeply in giving honor where honor is due. So can we just take a moment and thank God for our pastor? Thank him. Thank God for the way that he labors here locally, that he labors globally. Pastor Brian, when you see this, we love you. We're very grateful for you. He has charged me this morning with continuing in our Miracles sermon series. And as we jump into the word, I just have a real quick question for you. Have you ever found yourself, end of a day, maybe throughout the course of your week, kind of pausing and taking stock, and maybe you have this thought, well, that did not go according to plan. Anybody ever had this moment? Me up here, this was not part of my plan for my life. I was supposed to be on Broadway. We missed it. But we have those moments where we say, okay, this wasn't part of what I had planned. And when we get to those moments, then we might find ourselves asking a question or making a statement. If only this had happened, or if only this had not happened. And it could be a good thing. Things not going according to our plans. This can be a good thing, right? Maybe you woke up one day and you thought, oh man, it's my birthday, but it's Tuesday and it's a busy day. And I don't know if anybody's ever going to remember this or even think. I don't even know if anybody has time to think about me. And then you end the day at a surprise birthday dinner organized by your best friend. I know this is oddly specific, but just go with me here. And it's like the best day and the best ending to your day. Sometimes it's not great when things don't go according to your plan. Maybe you got up, you got yourself into the Word, you had your time with the Lord, you were fueled up, you were ready to go. You get to the office and find out they've made cuts, and now you've been laid off. Didn't see that coming. And these are the moments where we may find ourselves saying, okay, but if this had not happened, then this wouldn't have happened. Or if only this had happened, I wouldn't be stuck in this. I wouldn't be still dealing with this. I wouldn't be grieving this. As we get into the word today, we're actually going to be talking about the story of Lazarus' resurrection. And I think this is something many of us have heard. I know I grew up in the church. I grew up going to Sunday school. So I grew up in a world where all of these Bible stories became just stories to me. And I kind of failed to see the big story that was written. So maybe this is a story you've heard before. Songs have been written about this. We sang one of them this morning. You are still showing up at the tomb of every Lazarus. And I just gave away the ending a little bit here. The resurrection of Lazarus. I just think that there's maybe more to this story than first meets the eye. I will give you this heads up. It's 45 verses. Oh, so we're not reading the whole thing. Relax. We can all breathe a big sigh of relief. We are going to kind of work our way through it. And I do encourage you, even though I don't read all 45 verses today, please do that on your own time. It is so rich and it is so worth it, especially as you prepare for maybe your life group. You've connected with us that way. Please do take a second to read all of John 11, verses 1 through 45. I really hope that my life group caught that little homework assignment right there. But I want us just to focus in on a few key verses today. I'm going to read for us John 11, verses 17 to 22, and I'm reading out of the NLT, which is the New Living Translation. Follow along on the screens, or you can open your own Bibles. Here we go. John chapter 11, verse 17. When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. Now, Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. Pause right there. Martha and Mary, these are Lazarus' sisters. So when it says console them in their loss, that's the relationship that we're dealing with here, okay? We pick it right back up in verse 20. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him. But Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Let's jump down to verse 32. When Mary, that's our other sister, arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. I want to talk to us today from this topic, Lord, if only. Let's pray as we get into this. Father, I thank you for your word. Lord, I thank you for the way that your word reveals truth about you, but God, I also thank you for the way it reveals truth about us. So God, I'm asking that today as we open your word together, as we go into this together, that you would open our eyes to the things that you want us to see. You would open our ears to the things that you want us to hear. And I pray that your word would fall on good soil today. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, now, if you have ever heard me speak before, or you've read anything that I post on my blog or on my website, you might remember this. I love a good story. I love hearing them. I love telling them. This is why we have the story time chair when I come up and preach. This is something that I get into, and that is why I chose to read this out of the New Living Translation. This is more of a thought-for-thought translation of Scripture versus a word-for-word translation. Now, when Pastor Brian is up here, when Pastor Steve, Pastor Van, they are more apt to preach out of a word-for-word translation. And truthfully, if I was preaching like one of Paul's letters, I probably would have done the same thing. But for a narrative, for a story, I like the New Living Translation, that thought for thought. The reason being, it allows me to take in a little bit more of the comprehensive totality of what's going on. I find that I get hung up on wording and understanding the language when I'm in a word-for-word translation. But here's our caveat for the day, because we're going to stay in the NLT. Here's what we have to understand when we choose a thought-for-thought translation. There's more opportunity to paraphrase. And when we paraphrase, sort of like the telephone game that you used to play, there's more opportunity for us to misunderstand what some of the original text meant. So that is something that's going to happen to us today. So when we get to portions like that, I will pause and I will say, okay, this is a discrepancy in between the translations, and I'm going to take us into here's what the original text meant. We will get there. All right, we're getting closer and closer to story time. I can feel it. I'm getting excited. For those joining this program already in progress, let us recap a little bit here. This is where we've been so far in our Miracles Sermon series. I want us to talk through everything that we've seen Jesus do. First, there was the wedding at Cana, water into wine, saving someone's reputation. After that, we talked about him healing the official son. And I love this because he healed with just a word. He didn't even have to be in the same room. He spoke a word and the boy was healed miles away. So I love that story. Then we get to the healing of the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda, where Jesus asks him, do you want to be well? And we learned in that that's a loaded question. It was more than just, do you want to walk again? There was far more to that. And then Pastor Van got up here and he set the stage for us with the feeding of the 5,000, which we learned from Pastor Van was more like the feeding of the 18,000 by the time you accounted for all of the women and all of the children. And then I think probably in my top 2 favorite Pastor Brian sermons ever, Jesus walking on water. If you have not heard that message, it was, I think, February 5. Go back. Listen, it is so worth it. That is such a powerful, powerful moment. The idea, the imagery of Jesus walking through the storm to his disciples. And then last week, we got to the portion of scripture where we learned that Jesus healed the man who had been born blind in a very unconventional and muddy way. So, through all of these different miracles, people have taken notice. And they've heard Jesus start saying some statements that ruffled a few Pharisaical feathers, so to speak. Things like, I have come to render judgment. That was chapter 9. Or, what if I say I am the Son of God in chapter 10? The religious leaders, the Pharisees, they're not loving Jesus right now. These are bold statements, and they don't think that he has the clout to be making these statements. So they don't love him. In fact, at this point, they actually tried to stone Jesus shortly before our story picks up today. So he fled from that area, and this is where we find him in John chapter 11. You with me? All right, let's go. Story time. If you have a Bible or an app, I encourage you, flip back and forth. We're gonna live in John 11 mostly, but we're about to pop over to Luke 10. So here's our story. Lazarus is sick. This matters to Jesus because Lazarus and his sisters, Martha and Mary, they're friends of Jesus. They're very important to Jesus. Jesus loves them very deeply. So when he hears Lazarus is sick, this is significant. This is not just, oh, heal this guy over here. This is something that's really significant to Jesus. And also, you might remember, Mary and Martha, this is not their first mention of Scripture, is it? We also hear about them in Luke chapter 10. It's really brief, but I think that it really will help us kind of understand what we're dealing with. So let's go to Luke chapter 10 quickly here. This is in starting in verse 38 in the NLT. All right. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing and came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me." Let's pause right here. Did you catch the authority with which Martha spoke to Jesus? "Excuse me, Lord, you need to go do something about this. This is a problem." That is bold. That is extremely bold. But I like it. I kind of like it. And I'll explain why here in a second. But let's pick this up here. What does Jesus say in response to being told what to do? Picking it up in verse 41, "But the Lord said to her, 'My dear Martha,'" even when we annoy him, he's going to come back at us with "my dear," bless your little heart, you don't get it. "You are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her." All right, something to learn there from these sisters, something to learn here from the characterization that we get. I like Martha, guys. I make no bones about that. I like Martha. I think she gets a bad rap in this passage. She was focused on doing, and Mary was focused on sitting with Jesus, and we should all be more like Mary and just sit at the feet of Jesus. But here's the thing. If nobody does things, then nothing gets done. So I think that both of these things are important. And just to be clear, I am not arguing with Jesus' words. Mary has chosen the better. I'm not fighting with Jesus. I have learned my lesson. I will not do that. But I am taking debate with the way we apply this passage and the way that we can sometimes make ourselves feel with this passage. Well, I should be doing this. I should be doing this. I should be doing this. Here's the thing. After you have learned the value and the importance of sitting at the feet of Jesus, God might actually call you to get up and do something, to create an environment that allows other people to come and sit at the feet of Jesus. Both of these things matter, and the importance of one does not negate the importance of the other. And I'm looking at certain people in our congregation right now grinning at me because you know I am a Martha from now till the day is long. I will get stuff done. However, I do know sometimes I gotta sit and just be still. I've learned it. Both things are important. The key is knowing when to do what, right? So Martha, she's not all bad. You know what else I like about her? She is raw with Jesus. She has no problem telling Jesus how she feels. Look back at verse 40 for me. Should pop up here for us. And it says, look at what she says in quotes. "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair?" I love this. Here's why. In one breath, she calls him Lord. I know who you are. You are in charge, but let me also tell you this. I don't know if you caught this, but this is not right. This is not fair. Go tell her to do something about this. There's no religiosity coming out of Martha here. She's going to tell him exactly how she feels. She is raw with him. Now, she's also going to be corrected by him, but even that is for our good when he corrects us, right? It's harder. I think his correction feels a lot harder when we try to hide those things of who we are. Martha just came with it. This is all of who I am. So when that correction comes, there's grace. My dear Martha, there's love in this versus hiding and trying to put on a good front for Jesus. That kind of correction means that something's going to have to be revealed about you, and you're probably not going to like that when that happens. So there is a grace and there is an endearing moment when he corrects Martha here. And the thing is, when he stops correcting us or stops pruning us, as scripture says, then that is an indication that we have stopped abiding in him. And when that happens, we are left to our own devices, and God help us at that point, right? So even this correction while probably nobody likes getting put in their place, and I really don't think Martha loved it, I also think that we're going to see a little bit more of this as we get to John 11. I think it took her a minute to learn this lesson. But the bottom line for me is we probably have a lot more to learn from Martha than our Sunday school classes taught us back in the day. So let's pick it back up. Back to story time. John chapter 11. So Lazarus is sick. Naturally, they're sending word to Jesus. Jesus, this guy that you love, he's sick. They want him to know. I would have done the same thing. This is a guy that heals total strangers from a distance. Of course, he's going to want to heal his friend, right? It makes sense that he would go, but he doesn't go. Let's look at verses 4-6. It says, but when Jesus heard about it, he said, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this. So although Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. Did you catch that? Although he loved them, he stayed. So at this point, Jesus is speaking just to the disciples, and he's giving them the why. Here's why this has happened. It's not going to end in death, but this has happened so that God will receive the glory from this. But who was not there hearing the why? Lazarus, Martha, Mary. They have no idea why. They can't see the why. They only see the sickness that is around them. And I love this phrase, although he loved them. He didn't intervene. That had no bearing on how much he loved them. That is a note that would probably be good for us to tuck away. It's not that he didn't love them. His lack of action is not indicative of a lack of love. It just means there was another plan in motion. There was something else that was going on. Now, that plan would call him to intervene, just not when or how or the way that they were asking him to. But we get to this point, we have to realize, Martha, you still don't get to tell Jesus what to do. You didn't get to do it in Luke 10. You don't get to do it in John 11. And friends, neither do we. As much as this Martha might want to do that from time to time, we don't get to tell him what to do, because this brings me to my first point today. Our plan does not negate Jesus' purpose. We have a plan, we have a way that things should go, but it is the Lord who orders our steps. Our plan does not negate his purpose. So 2 days later, Jesus decides it's time to go check on Lazarus. It's time to go see what's going on here. Now, the disciples kind of freak out about this, and I get why, because remember, he's going back to the place where a couple days before they tried to stone him. So I'm a disciple, I'm also freaking out. Lord, are you aware? I know that you're Jesus, but do you know that you're going back to a place that is really scary here? But Jesus assures them nothing is going to happen to him. It's not time for harm to come to him. And he does this very poetically. But he expresses to them, it's all good. Don't worry about this. That's not a thing you need to be concerned with. He tells them Lazarus is asleep, and now I have to go wake him up. He's speaking metaphorically here. He does that a lot, right? This is Jesus. He does this a lot. The disciples totally miss it and don't get it. They do that a lot. They totally miss it a lot too. So we have everybody acting according to their character here in this moment. So Jesus has to tell them plainly in verse 14. So he, being Jesus, told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him. And then probably my favorite verse in this whole passage, verse 16. Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let's go too and die with Jesus. So Thomas somehow missed the no harm will come to me memo. I don't think he didn't quite get that. Let's go too and let's just everybody go die with Jesus. I love his devotion. By the way, this is also the same Thomas that later we would call Doubting Thomas, so it tracks, right? This is character development at its finest here. But Thomas, while he does offer this bit of comic relief, he is also revealing his lack of understanding. And I want to focus on what Jesus says to him in verse 15. For your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you will really believe. Is anybody else questioning why they don't believe? Let's recap. In the first week of this series, I'm pretty sure it was the first week, maybe the second. But Pastor Brian taught us about progressing faith, that there's kind of an advancement that we go through. I don't even want to call it levels, but there's a revealing that happens as we continue on our journey with Jesus. So maybe that's what he's talking about when he says this, but I'm stuck on this. We have a man who has turned water into wine. He has performed multiple healings at this point. He has multiplied the little boy's lunch to feed 18,000 people. He has defied time and gravity and whatever other natural laws you defy when you walk on water, and you still don't believe. What else does he have to do in order to get you to see what's really going on? Yet, Jesus meets them right here in their place of doubt, right here in let's go die with Jesus. He meets them right in this moment in their lack of understanding. He hasn't abandoned them to their unbelief. He doesn't abandon us to our unbelief. So just by chance, if there's someone in the room right now who is sitting here thinking, yeah, I'm here, and I'll listen to you, but you don't know what I've been through. You don't know how hard this is for me. You don't know what I have walked through. I don't have to know. What I do know is that he's not leaving you in this place, that he meets you when you don't understand, that it is a progressing faith that we walk through. You don't have to understand everything to believe. This happened so that they may believe. Jesus and the disciples eventually on their journey, they make it to Bethany. This is where Lazarus and his sisters live, and now we are finally caught up to the passage that we started with here in verse 21. Martha says to Jesus, "Lord, if you'd only been here, my brother would not have died, but even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask." So there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, I see Martha being Martha again. If you'd been here, my brother would not have died. This is on you, Jesus. If you had been here, this never would have happened, but you didn't come, and now this is what I'm dealing with, and it's all your fault. There's a little bit of that connotation there. Now, granted, I do think that she's banking on Jesus' character when she says this, right? But how does she really know? Isn't she making an assumption? How do you really know that your brother would have lived if Jesus had been there? Because Jesus had already expressed to the disciples, now she wasn't there, fair enough, but he had already expressed to the disciples what was going to happen. So would Lazarus have lived if she had gotten what she wanted in that moment? Doesn't really matter. The purpose is here that, or the point of this is that Mary and Martha, they had this plan, this expectation of what should have happened and how it should have happened. Jesus just had a greater purpose as he was walking through this now. But I also want to acknowledge verse 22. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Martha is demonstrating her faith here. She is disappointed. She is hurt. She didn't get her way. Can I tell you, I think beyond just being hurt and disappointed, we have to understand the weight of what would happen to Martha and Mary if Lazarus dies. Notice how there is no mention of a husband. There's no mention of a father here. We are in a patriarchal society, so the loss of her brother is not only a relational loss, but it's a loss of covering, a loss of protection. So there's got to be this feeling of, I'm hurt, I'm disappointed, but I'm also scared. What happens to me now? And all the context clues that we get here out of this, notice how in Luke 11 it called the home Martha's home. When we look at these, the sisters and the brother listed, she's always listed first. The odds are she's the oldest here. So this is now going to fall to her to care for Mary. So if I'm in Martha's shoes, I'm not just sad that I have a brother, and I would be devastated if something happened to him. I don't have to think very hard to imagine what that would be like. So it's not just the relational loss, but there's a loss of security that comes with this. Now what happens to me? And also, I got to figure it out for Mary. So she knows what she's feeling. We can guess, but Martha knows what she's feeling. Yet in this verse, she says, but even now, it's almost as if she's saying, I know what's happening and I know how I feel, but I still know who you are. Even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Which brings me to my second point. Our pain does not negate Jesus' authority in our lives. We may feel it. It may hurt. It may ache. It may or may not be resolved when, how, where we think it should. But we know who he is. His authority still stands. In fact, I would say that our pain might just be the perfect environment for his authority and his lordship to be put on display in our lives. Now, Mary, she shows up a couple verses later, and she is saying word for word what Martha said. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. In fact, scholars believe that the continuity between the sisters' wording here reveals that they've discussed this before. So I can imagine them sitting at Lazarus' bedside, watching their brother slowly fade into death, looking at each other, trying to console one another. It's okay. We sent word. Jesus loves him. Jesus will come. It's okay. We're going to be okay. Lazarus is going to be healed. Jesus will come. We've told him what was going on. He will come. He loves us. He will come. Jesus will come. Jesus will come. But Jesus doesn't come. And by the time he shows up, it's too late. And now all of a sudden, Lord, if only you had been here, this is the fruit of Jesus didn't come. Can you relate to that feeling? As I read this, I was struck. There's that moment where hope starts to slowly fade into grief, and then you're left and you don't know what has broken your heart more, the loss or the fact that Jesus didn't come. We don't know sometimes. All we feel is that emotion. But I want to give Jesus a moment to weigh in. Let's check in and see. If it's true that our pain does not negate his authority, then let's see what's going on with him as we hit this passage. Pick it up in verse 33. It says, when Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. A deep anger welled up, and he was deeply troubled. Now, I told you at the beginning that one of the things we weigh and we risk when we read a thought-for-thought translation is not accurately understanding some of the wording. So if you're following along in a different translation, it might read differently here for you. And this is one of those moments where our thought-for-thought does not accurately express what the original text said. So we're going to pause and let's break it down. This idea of Jesus being angry, it doesn't mean what we think it means. Rather, this is giving clue to the fact that there's now visible emotion welling up in him. Scholars believe that it's like a tremor that rises up and now is expressed through his physical body. He shuddered. That's what it is. The turmoil, the weighing of emotion that's going on in him is no longer contained just inside of him. And now his body is physically showing what he is feeling on the outside. Have you ever seen somebody that, I see this with kids a lot, and they get so mad or so frustrated, they just sort of shake. That's why we get to this, the word anger. That's how we arrived at that. It's more of a frustration. It's more of an outward expression of an inward turmoil. In fact, the original word is similar in origin to the wording used to describe Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane before his arrest, where the Bible says that his sweat was like drops of blood. So if you've ever imagined that scenario, this is akin to that. However, it would be incorrect for us to say these are identical terms. They're not, but they are similar. So we use one to help us understand the other, but not to fully define the other. Make sense? Okay, I don't want us to totally... He didn't feel the same way at the tomb of Lazarus that he did in the garden before he was arrested. But they are similar in the way that it's expressed. You with me so far, guys? All right, here we go. Jesus is in turmoil, and he asks to be taken. I just got to get closer. We're getting to the really good part. Okay. So Jesus here is in turmoil. He asks to be taken to the tomb where Lazarus, he is laid. And as they walk, there are people talking amongst themselves here. We see this in Scripture. John, as he writes this gospel, he takes careful time to acknowledge the fact that there are mourners, there are others. We said that in verse 33. It says when the other people were wailing with her. There's more than just the sisters and the disciples and Jesus now. There are mourners and other people around, and they're all traveling with Jesus. And as they do, you've got Martha and Mary holding on to the last little bit of comfort that the presence of Jesus offers them, and hearing the voices of the mourners who are casting doubt in this moment. Almost like, well, why are you so upset, Jesus? You're Jesus. You could have stopped this. They're questioning this. And so imagine being, if it's loud enough that John hears it to put it in the gospel, then it's loud enough that the sisters heard it too. Is that what they need to hear in this moment? We got to be very careful the voices that we give ear to. And this is a moment that they're hearing these things like, well, if Jesus really loved them, he would have prevented this. If he really cared, he would have ... It's the same voice casting doubt on the Son of God that I recall when Jesus goes to start his earthly ministry, and he's in the wilderness for 40 days, and he hears this voice of the enemy saying to him, if you were really the Son of God, turn this stone into bread. Again, we have got to learn the tendencies of the voices that we hear so that we know which voices we should be rebuking and which voices to which we should be responding. But if we don't recognize that, then we have to now fight. Mary and Martha have to fight a whole other battle hearing this stuff that they shouldn't be fighting in their moment of grief and in their fighting or in their moment of weakness here. So that takes me to our third point today. Our perception does not negate Jesus's mission. Remember, these words and these questions, these are being asked in they're not quiet about it. If John heard it, Jesus heard it. Come on, it's Jesus. He heard it, but at no point does he stop and set them straight because Jesus is on a mission. And so our perception, our understanding, their understanding of what was going on here, it's not more important than the mission that he was on. So he continues walking. He continues moving. Guys, I just want to remind us that the fact that this is all that we see does not mean that this is all there is. And that is the truth that Jesus knew in this moment, and he chose to let this happen. He is on a mission. He's going to focus on that mission. For the record, I don't think this was an intentional thing. I don't think that they meant necessarily, I don't think they intended to cast out. However, we have to be aware, sometimes we're going to be Mary and Martha and we're grieving, and other times we're going to be the voices. And so we have to make sure that we understand a lack of intention. This is not synonymous with a lack of impact here in what we say. But our perception does not negate Jesus's mission. So they arrive at the tomb. Here it comes. Jesus is still visibly wrestling. And he says to them, unseal the tomb, roll the stone away. And Martha, my dear Martha, Martha's being Martha again, and she responds and she says, hold up, don't do this. He's been in there 4 days at this point. The smell is going to be overwhelming. Jesus, you don't want to do this. But Jesus, he gets to be Jesus, right? And so he responds in verse 40, and he says to her, didn't I tell you that you would see the glory of God if you believe? Once again, here's this emphasis on believing, right? By the way, didn't I tell you that you would see? Sounds an awful lot like first miracle, woman, my time has not yet come. Jesus is going to be Jesus. All right. So then we get to this moment. He tells them again, roll the stone away. And then he prays aloud for all to hear, to the glory of God, he prays. And then he turns his attention back to the tomb. And he demands, Lazarus, come forth. And out walks Lazarus. Because remember what he said, this will not end in death. So out walks Lazarus, grave clothes and all. He gives them the mission to unwrap him, let him go on his way. That's a great ending to the story, right? Well, it would be a great ending if the story was only about the resurrection of Lazarus. But let's recap what we have learned so far today. It's not just a story of Lazarus' resurrection. We've learned that, first, our plan does not negate Jesus' purpose. Second, our pain does not negate Jesus' authority. And third, our perception does not negate Jesus' mission. Guys, I don't think this is a story solely about the resurrection of Lazarus. I think this is a story where Jesus used a resurrection to teach them about his lordship. Yeah. I think there's more than what we look at first glance. In fact, what if I told you this isn't the ending to a story at all? Rather, this is the beginning of our story with Jesus. Do you remember how troubled he was? Remember that shuddering, that turmoil that he felt? Did you question, if Jesus knew this is not going to end in death, why is he so moved by this death? Is it that he's just so full of compassion? Maybe. But to me, what Jesus knew this whole time we've heard, he knew something they didn't know. So if you know this is not going to end in death, why are you so visibly moved a deep anger welling up within him, the trigger here does not seem to match the response. Something feels off to me, and I think that we uncover it as we keep reading. Can we go to verse 45 here? Many of the people who were with Mary believed in Jesus when they saw this happen. Verse 46, but some went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Skip down to verse 53, because I think this is where we see it. So from that time on, the Jewish leaders began to plot Jesus's death. What did Jesus know that nobody else knew? He knew that Lazarus' resurrection would cue the events that would result in his own resurrection. So this isn't a story just about Lazarus. It's the story that cues Jesus' resurrection. It's the story that becomes the catalyst for our reconciliation to God. There was more weight to this moment than anybody could have imagined. Because before Jesus can be raised from the dead, he has to die. Before he dies, he's crucified. Before he's crucified, he's persecuted. He suffers. Before he suffers, he's arrested. And before he was arrested, he shuddered at the tomb of his friend. There's more. There's more. It's not just about the man walking forward in grave clothes. It's about the fact that we don't have to be in our grave clothes. There is more weight to this than we could imagine. He knew, as he shuddered outside of Lazarus' tomb, he knew that there would come a time, and very soon, where he would not be there to display the power of God in the flesh. So he really needed them to get it. The emphasis on so that you would believe. This is arguably, in our human perception, a miracle is a miracle, but in our human perception, raising someone from the dead, this is big. And he needed it to be big because the faith born of this moment had to be enough to sustain them through his arrest, through his trial, through his death. They had to know that there was more coming. We have to know that there is more coming through the pain, through the disappointment, through a lack of security. He needs the miracle to be big enough. So my question for you, what if all this happened so that you would believe? What if there is a faith being birthed in you, even now, in the middle of the diagnosis that can't be cured, in the middle of the illness that cannot be diagnosed, in the middle of the relationship that won't be reconciled, in the middle of the sorrow that no one else understands? What if it's happening so that you may believe, that it would sustain you until you see him in glory once more? Jesus knew something that they didn't know, and I think he still knows something we don't know. So my challenge to you, in these moments, when we find ourselves tempted to respond with, Lord, if only you'd been here, do we leave room for the fact that he knows something we don't? What if, Lord, if only you had been here, turns into, Jesus, thank you for this opportunity to trust you more? And I believe that there's maybe a couple things we're dealing with in the room here. Either you are walking through it or someone you know is walking through it. And if you can't say yes to either of those things, just give it 5 minutes, because we're always going to be going through. If you are someone that has called him Lord, but too many if-onlys have stepped in and caused you to Martha your way through it and take it into your own hands, and now it's on you to keep it going, I encourage you. We're going to pause here in just a second. We're going to take a moment to let the Lord have his time with our hearts. But I encourage you in this moment, God, thank you for the opportunity to trust you more. Just give it back. Whatever's inspired your worry, your fear, your doubt, your lack of security, let him have that. Because his purpose is more important than your pain. He's doing something. But perhaps you're in the room and you have never called him Lord. Maybe you were one of those people that had the thought early on, okay, well, that's nice for you to say, but you don't know what I've been through. Then I encourage you, take this moment. Acknowledge all the things you have walked through. You know, I don't have to know. But acknowledge all of those things and then just ask, what if these things happen so that I may believe? So that I may truly believe that God really did become man in the person of Jesus Christ, that he really did live the life I was supposed to live, that he really did die for me. He shuddered at the thought of this. But 3 days later, he also rose from the grave, proving he really is the Son of God, offering the gift of salvation, offering the forgiveness of sin to all who would turn to him and believe. So we're going to pause. No voices. It's really hard for the worship leader to say. We're not going to go back into music here because I don't want anything standing in the way of us hearing from the Lord. Would you go before him now? I thank you that when we call you Lord, that you're not just hoarding this over us, but that you are good to us, that your plan always works out for the good of those who love you, who are called according to your purposes, that when we call you Lord, we set our eyes on you, even when we don't know what to do. I thank you for the obstacles. We do choose to count it joy when we face these hardships, knowing that this is the moment that you are creating something that will outlast any sense of emotion, any sense of struggle. You are birthing a faith within us that will outlast all of that. God, I thank you for this. I pray that as we go today, that your word would return to our minds, that we would think on this, that we would meditate on this, that we would spend time in your word this week being reminded of the voice of our Father, that we can turn a deaf ear to the voice of the enemy in these moments. Thank you, God, for what you're doing. We love you and we trust you. In Jesus' name, amen.